So I kind of just wanted to get into how you became a pastor and where you are today. So
yeah, how did I get to this point? Yeah, so I think it wasn't something that was ever on my radar initially. When I was a young man, I wasn't a follower of Christ. I had ideas to just, make money, try to be successful, things of that nature. As a teenager, I became a follower of Christ, and real estate always fascinated me. And so I thought about being a real estate agent, and of course you're going to do fine living wise. But then after I became a follower of Christ, sitting in church, I didn't know how to quantify it. I didn't know how to verbalize it at the time. But every time my pastor got up to preach, or my youth pastor, any of the preachers at our church who came in, whatever, it was like inside, I couldn't verbalize it then, but there would be like this stirring of, man, I want to do that. But it was very contradictory because my wife doesn't believe this. I was very backwards, incredibly insecure, shy. I would even say the word introvert, though people would maybe say, "Oh, I know you, and you don't seem like an introvert." But I mean, I just sweat through my shirt.
I didn't know you before, but you already
yeah, right, exactly. You're right. That's why my wife's like, "What?" So even when she met me, so I think one of the significant issues for me was I'd feel that stirring and I'd feel confused because I'm like, I can't even shake people's hands without sweating through my shirt. And that's not an exaggeration. Like I'm just, the gross stuff. And so I talked to my youth pastor about it. I talked to our lead pastor about it. I talked to one of the deacons in the church about it. And just what does this mean? I don't understand. I've only been a Christian like a year. I've been reading the word. I've been in the assembly. I've been growing. I've been serving. I don't know what this means. And so each of them independently told me the same thing. Likely you need to discern what your gifting is from the Lord. And so we went through some things about our spiritual gifting. And then I talked with a veteran missionary who was retired and a member of our church who taught our Bible Institute. And he directed me the same way. And so we went through that and talked about what could be my spiritual gifting, discerning that. And then what does that mean for applying that? And if it is towards being a pastor, what do I need to consider in becoming a pastor? How do I go about that? So that would be kind of how it began, was an ignorance about how to define my gifting, to discerning my gifting, to it being affirmed by my pastor, and then the congregation as they gave teenagers opportunity to preach, any of the young man opportunities to do that, not only in the youth department, but with the entire congregation. We do that. And in the congregation, there'd be men and women who would talk about, man, it's really incredible to see how the Lord's using you and how he seems to have gifted or called you. And so I'd say there's independent understanding of it. There's affirmation from those who are spiritual mentors, and then affirmation from the congregation as well. And so that would be the genesis of it. How did you go from teenager wanting to be a real estate agent? What's that? Sweating through your shirt, introvert, to this shining example. No, so literally shining example. So it's only the second episode of the podcast. You haven't been able to hire makeup yet. Otherwise, we'd be able to get that.
We'd have a wig and everything.
Yeah, exactly. I'd look great, Get my teeth fixed too while we're at it. So, but that's kind of would be the start of it. And from there, training, etc., which I think we're going to talk about a little bit more later. But that would be, how'd you even get down this path? That's how it all started right there when I was probably around 16, 17.
Okay, that's really cool. I've realized that a lot of people, they don't realize the skills that they're building. They don't realize what they're going to be applied for, and then boom, they're in whatever role. Mm-hmm. And it was all orchestrated by God from the beginning. So since we're talking about pastoring and leadership, can you give a differentiation? Because some people say, "Oh, the pastor, he preaches, and then he doesn't do anything else."
We golf 5 days a week and work 2. Yeah, it's been a sweet journey. Yeah. So I think kind of that's the difference, right? Sometimes there's this idea that if you're going to be a pastor, you have to have the right personality, the right talents, the same skill sets as. So I think it's important we differentiate between the office of the pastorate, the gifting that's associated with that office, versus being a leader in the church and therefore also in our community as well. Just because somebody is a leader doesn't mean they're gifted, enabled, called, to be a pastor, right? It doesn't mean they couldn't be, but it's not like, oh, that guy's a great leader, he should be a pastor. No. That may not be. We have great leaders in our church, in the military, in the public sector, as executives, whatever it might be, doctors, whatever. That doesn't mean they either are qualified, called, or desirous of being a pastor. So there is a differentiation. And I think in American culture, there's so much emphasis on leadership. And not that that's bad and wrong necessarily. Yeah. I think there's so much push that everybody has to be a leader. That, number one, that's not true. We're all leading someone, that's for sure, and influencing someone. But this idea of cultural, American cultural idea of what leadership is and is not is often based in secular terms with secular goals. So we want to be careful about bleeding that into the church, number one. But number two, recognizing that even Paul talked about leaders within the New Testament church that weren't pastors. And they exerted godly, gracious influence on brothers and sisters in Christ to make eternal decisions for Christ and to further the gospel of Christ. So again, somebody could be a leader. That doesn't mean they have to be a pastor. And it doesn't mean a pastor has to meet our criteria and qualification of what we think a leader is or has to be, And so I think those are really two important differentiations to make, not only about the formal office, but the function of that office as well.
Okay. So you would say like a pastor meets the biblical qualifications in 1 Timothy. And then you also mentioned that you have to be called and then you have to respond to it. Like you can't just be put there. The congregation has to affirm you in all of these different steps going into it. Thank you for watching the video. Leave a comment. We want to know what you thought about it. And support us. Hit the like, subscribe, and check out our podcast. We're trying to empower the body to do the Lord's work better. See you in the next one.